Welcome to the Impact Effect podcast. We've got an amazing episode, and I truly mean it. A rainmaker, a family man, a present father, a great guy. Please help me welcome George Hayworth to Impact Effect podcast.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Let's go. I'm fired up.
Yeah,
everybody.
buddy.
Let's go. All right. In true fashion, we are going to resort back to our number one question we ask guests. That question is, how are you showing up in the world and providing positive impact today?
I love it. I love the name Impact Effect because, that's what I challenge men to do is make an impact, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I think that's where legacy really comes from. But how I'm making impact is with Elite Sentinel Coaching. And what we do is we forge leaders to build their legacies. And I think at its core, that's what a lot of men are missing today is that leadership skill, whether that's in your business or in your family. And so we really try to hone in on that, build men up so that they can go make positive impacts in the world. And like I said, that's where I think legacy comes into. So that's probably number one. And then outside of that, I'm also the co-founder and co-host of the Present Fathers podcast. And in a similar vein, we're really honing in on fathers there and trying to give them a lot of advice and, network with other men who are trying to be outstanding fathers, regardless of their background, to equip them to raise strong families. So kind of a dual threat there in terms of what I'm working on, but that's probably the number one way I'm making an impact in the world today.
Wow. We got a lot to unpack.
We have a lot, yeah.
We got a lot to unpack. Okay, so strength seems to be a through line core value, building a legacy, future, leadership. Where did all this come from?
It's a great question. So that's something I thought I was good at because, very long story short, I did join the military when I was leaving high school. I got a scholarship to do ROTC and wanted to serve my country and do something bigger than myself. And so I learned a lot of these skills, through military training, but I didn't really understand how to apply these universally. And a lot of that leadership training really is universal, but I kind of put it in my little army box. And then I was a terrible husband, a terrible father, terrible friend to some of the guys I even deployed with, right? And it's really because I was lacking understanding of what really makes a great man. And so, strength and determination, a lot of these things are definitely part of the equation. But at a high level, I believe there's 4 pillars of what makes a great man. And I call them the Pillars of Authentic Masculinity. And it's king, warrior, mentor, and friend or lover. And really, it's kind of that at a high level being balanced, right? Sometimes you do need to have a lot of strength and authority. Other times you need to have a lot of patience and understanding. Well, I was Mr. Strength and Authority and not a lot of patience and understanding. And over time, I've learned, you and I both know some of the same guys who I really look up to. And I think they really model that, right? There's strength and there's love. And when you pair those two things together, that's really, to me, the mark of a man who really understands who he is and how to make that impact. So I'm sure there's a lot you want to unpack there, but at a high level, that's kind of the focus.
Gotcha. So when did this shift happen? You said you were at one point a bad leader, bad dad, bad father, maybe not in those terms, but you weren't really,
I was definitely struggling.
You weren't really going the trajectory you can and want to go.
Yeah. The George I am today is not the George I needed to be a decade ago. It comes back to that lack of understanding. And, a lot of it kind of stems from my childhood. There's a lot of, emotional manipulation in my upbringing. My parents split up when I was 16. I had a lot of anger and bitterness. I wasn't a very big guy. So I kind of really had this chip on my shoulder to really prove how tough I was and all this kind of stuff. So, there was a deep wound within me for sure. And so a lot of my outward behaviors were really trying to just mask this scared little boy to fool the world that I'm this tough man, right? And, depending on your background, you may resonate with some of that, those of you listening, but I think a lot of men find themselves in similar situations. Either they grew up in a home that was divorced, they didn't have a dad around, maybe their dad wasn't very good, and they never really got great training on, well, what do I do after I finish high school? What really makes a good man at that point, right? We're kind of just on this conveyor belt of do good in school and then good luck. And that's kind of the extent of what men get trained. And when it comes to things like being a good husband and father, I mean, you're living it right now with the little ones. That's hard work, but it's highly important. And I think we under prioritize how much an impact a father can make in pursuit of our career or things like that, right? Getting clicks on social media. And so I was kind of this guy chasing success really to just mask my lack of being a man, really. Kind of this mask, really. And that shift really started when I kind of found myself basically at rock bottom. I had left the Army in 2016. All of my wounds and all of my inadequacies as a man really rose to the surface. My wife and I were really struggling. Our marriage was on the brink of divorce. We even separated, and that's a whole separate episode just on that kind of stuff. But really, at the end of the day, right, we were both at fault on many things, but I'm responsible for me. But I was still acting like a teenage boy, blaming my wife. Oh, she's doing this to me, or she can't handle herself, or she should not, blah, 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 right? It was victimhood. It was victim mentality. And I even took it a step further with like, well, I'm a combat veteran. You should give me extra, blah, 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 blah. It was just victimhood. And that's what a teenage boy does, right? How do I get mine, right? How do I take care of me? But long story short there, our marriage struggles really kind of was the symptom of me not being the man that I should have been growing towards. And I'm not saying men should be perfect, because that's impossible, but there's a lot of simple truths that stem back to those 4 pillars, which we can talk more about, that really, regardless of what stage of life you're in, those are kind of the litmus test of, are you doing the right thing? And I often was prioritizing myself over my family. And I became a very selfish, scared teenage boy trapped in a man's body. And that shift started when, at the brink of divorce, feeling like there's no way out, I basically realized, okay, I need some serious help. And so it took me a long time to become the guy that right? We've only known each other for a little while. You probably wouldn't have been my friend 5 years ago. And you probably thought, man, this guy's kind of a loser, because I kind of was, and I have only myself to blame for that. So that journey took me a long time. But in the last couple years, I feel like I've really turned a corner. My understanding of just some of these simple truths that had escaped me for a long time, I have them now. And it not only played such a role in my life of healing our marriage and making me a more present father and being able to help others more fully, I recognize that I have a lot to offer others who are on similar journeys themselves. So kind of a long-winded way to answer when did the shift start, but I'd say really from about 2016 to really about 2021. I was kind of that guy that had a lot to figure out, and I'd made a boatload of mistakes. And so my heart is so in this today, because I want to give guys the cheat codes, right? The fast track to getting back into being a strong, capable man who cares for his family and makes an impact for others. So you don't need a whole decade like I did.
And you also fixed your marriage. You also survived those hard times. And I think there's a lot of men out there that haven't had that opportunity, right? So if you can show up and educate and share your experiences and your heart and really pour into these men, maybe you can save some marriages, which in turn is positive impact, right? I mean,
definitely.
Think about it on that deep of a granular level of what actually your program can do. And, we all know that divorce causes heartache. It affects children, finances, right? Yeah. Like there's a plethora of things. So just that alone for that person listening, what would you tell them to go seek help? That person who knows it's falling apart, who sees the symptoms, but maybe they haven't had the tough conversation. Maybe they haven't separated yet, but they know it's kind of coming. They're kind of neglecting it. They're thinking maybe it's not happening, or maybe there's a longer road, runway till it does happen. What do you say to that person today?
So I want to clarify one thing. Like, I didn't fix our marriage. I mean, my wife and I did, right? We both fought for our marriage. And if you want to go research my story, you can hear all about, the problematic George that I used to be, and the way that I hurt her. But, that was a team effort. It's not like I just became this super great dude and I magically fixed everything. And I know that's not what you were implying, but I really want to make that clear that I just started owning my crap. I took accountability for myself and stopped playing the blame game with my wife. And here's really to the men specifically, and we can talk to the wives out there too in a second, but for the men specifically, that's where you have to start, is with you. Now, could your wife be wrong on a lot of things? Probably, right? There's no perfect women. There's no perfect men. There's plenty of blame to go around. But if you're playing the blame game, you're still just being a victim at some level. And you're just making it harder for your spouse to actually fix their own stuff. And that's what I finally realized way too late in the game was, if I take ownership of myself, start growing in the things that I should have grown in a long time ago, it at least gives my wife some breathing room to hopefully work on her stuff too. Now she has to do that. I can't do it for her. I'm not talking about being codependent, but there is a truth that we've forgotten in society. We were joking, there's two genders again now, but men act and women respond. Women are responsive creatures, and I don't mean that as an insult. It's men are designed to initiate and kind of make movement, and women are naturally receptive and responsive to men, and that's where really their superpower comes into play. And any married man who works well with his wife understands this, right? You make a move, and she's then like in lockstep with you, and she just amplifies anything you could have done, tenfold. And that's really where women shine the most. And it's not, again, doesn't mean women can't be business leaders or any of that kind of stuff. So don't read too much into what I'm saying. But within the context of a marriage, if the man grows first, improves himself, connects himself with other like-minded men who are trying to be better husbands too, and are going to hold him accountable, it's virtually impossible for the wife to not also make improvement. Not because she needs him to like fix her stuff, but because he's not making it harder for her for once, right? And that's really what my wife and I's dynamic is at a high level. That was the number one problem, was I had all this list and account of all the wrongs she'd done, right? Totally downplaying my own. And then we just get in this cycle of you're essentially just blaming each other. You're assuming the worst about each other. And that's a, recipe for disaster. So to the men, one, you can't do it alone. The lone wolf gets eaten. You must have brotherhood. And when I talk about brotherhood, I'm talking about real conversation with other men who truly know your crap, can call you on it, but also give you advice on how to become better. And the people you surround yourself with, you're going to be more like them, right? We're the average of our 5 closest friends. It's the truth. It's not a cliche. That is how it works. You hang out with better men, you're going to become a better husband. It is impossible to level up your circle of men and not become a better man. It's just impossible. It's how it works. So that's step one, is you got to get over yourself. You got to lay down your pride or your fear and open up to some people that can actually help you along the way. That was my number one step was, I went to therapy. I got surrounded by guys who were actually doing better. I surrounded myself with the people who told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And when I was making all these mistakes, it's because I just had a circle of enablers that I had cultivated on my own by wearing all these masks and pretending to be something that I'm not. And that is, it may work in the short term. You may have some initial success, but you're going to get overwhelmed. The double life will catch up with you. It's a weight that no one can carry on their own. And that's why moving forward, I'm just super open about my story, not because I'm trying to put all my, garbage out there, but it's just because transparency is the only way forward. If we're honest, courageously transparent with each other, we can actually start to have real healing. So for the men out there, that's step number one. And to the wives, to the women listening to this, and maybe you've been offended by something I've said, really my heart goes out to you too, because it's not about power or control. If you're in that dynamic, you don't have a marriage, you have a tyrant and the oppressed. That's not what marriage is. Marriage is a covenant bond between a man and a woman, right? And so in the same way that he has to take accountability for himself, you do too. Now, the way men and women respond is very different. And, again, this could be a whole separate episode, but you have to own your stuff too. You got to acknowledge your flaws and your faults too. And he needs to do his thing. And this is where grace, both ways, is so critical. My wife has given me so much grace over our marriage. And that's why we're here, right? She is an amazing woman who gave me an abundance of grace and patience that I absolutely did not deserve. And I've had to do the same for her at points. But that grace allows the healing to even have a chance. If you're going to be vindictive and blaming and keeping an account of everybody's wrongs and faults and, just constantly going back to square one, you're not going to make any progress. So again, very long-winded, but, there's this idea of ownership is so powerful. It's not just this buzzword that Jocko Willink throws around in his book. It truly is. You're an adult. You're responsible for yourself. And until you start acting like that, your marriage isn't going to be an adult relationship until you treat it as such. And so men and women, the blame game is what losers do. Now, it doesn't mean we just take whatever they throw at us if it is wrong. There's still boundaries. There's still health involved in this and strength and love. But at your core, you have to be willing to make that long-term investment in this person that you committed your life to. And if you're not willing to do that, there's no way you're going to succeed. You have to fight for your marriage. And thankfully, my wife has fought with me side by side to restore our marriage. And so we're at a point today where, I say we're ecstatically married. I mean, we're having some of the best years of our life now that we never thought we'd be able to have because of all the wounding in the past.
Wow. There's a few things I want to unpack here.
Sure, let's do it.
Remind me and everybody listening of the 4 pillars.
Yeah, so maybe it would help to define those too.
Yes, please.
But at a very high level, right? It's king, warrior, mentor, and friend. King is men you need to lead. You're designed for it, right? We're like trucks. You're better with a little weight in the back. You need to bear the responsibility of leadership for your family. Again, this doesn't mean that women can't lead too, and it's not tyranny, but it's actual leadership, which starts with ownership, right? I own the outcomes for my family. I don't turn and blame my wife if something goes wrong. I find out how to solve it. That's number one. There's a lot more to it, but we'll start with there just to keep a high level. The warrior pillar is a little bit more obvious. Men, physically, you should be a warrior. You should be able to defend your family from threats, full stop. So if you're overweight listening to this, I'm not mad at you, but I'm mad for you because you're a liability, not an asset. That should, sting a little if you're in that boat. But that's not it. The warrior is far more than just a physical brute. It is to defend the innocent, number one. And two, where are the threats today? Is it, someone kicking down your door and robbing your house? Maybe. But that's like, in America, probably less than 1% chance of that happening. What is more likely? Your kids getting exposed to something on TV or, pornographic books at the school library or something like that? Where are the men who've been, where have the men been to stand up to things culturally that we don't support for the last 30 years? You need to be a warrior for your ideals and beliefs, not just, oh, well, I'd take a bullet for my family. Great, bro. Will you live for them? That's the warrior pillar. The mentor pillar is pretty straightforward. Men love to, gain knowledge and mastery ourselves, right? Like, you and I talk about business. It's exciting because it's a shared thing we have and we both love to help each other. That's mentorship in action, but it's a give and take. You have to be humble enough to recognize where the person is and want to train them. And men should take what they've learned, their skills, their mastery, and pay it forward to the next generation. That's it. And then the final one is love, friend or lover. And really, this is the catalyst to everything we just discussed. If you don't have love in your heart, you're likely being more of a tyrant. You're looking for selfish gain. Love is that kind of stopgap of, I'm going to understand these other people. I'm going to have empathy for them, and I'm going to meet them where they're at so I can actually help them in their position instead of just being like, well, you should get tougher. Great, thanks. That's helpful. The lover pillar is really what takes that man who's strong, tough, determined, a warrior, a mentor, all these things, and then elevates you into a tender warrior. You become this true man at that point because every interaction, whether it's business or family, is driven by wanting to help others succeed. And it doesn't mean you don't gain too. It's a very mutually beneficial process. But like we were referring, some of the guys we know, like Nick Alfano or other guys we know locally in Nashville who are just absolute studs across the board. They're all some of the most loving men that I know. They're some of the most understanding people I've ever met in my life with anyone they interact with. And again, that's what takes men and elevates you to that higher level. So at a high level, those are the 4 pillars. And it's really the basis. You
talked about masks, which is something that I think is needs to be talked about more.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think it needs to be talked about more is because I think every human every day is wearing some sort of a mask. Right? Mm-hmm. And there's good reason behind some of that. There's traumas, there's things that are subjective to having conversations with someone you don't necessarily know, right? Because we have to protect certain information.
Yeah.
And we have to protect certain information that's not ours to share, right? So there is a level of it that I think is required, but I also think we exploit the shit out of the level that's required as far as confidential conversations or friendships or relationships. It's actually so important to me to break those molds and those masks that we're doing a dinner party in a couple weeks, and the opening conversation amongst the dinner, and the dinner's called Beyond the Table, is to reduce the masks. And there's some activities and there's some things and there's curriculum that I walk people through. So this is something that really, really hits home for me.
Yeah.
In your work, your clients, your experience, what masks are you seeing some of these men wear in these pillars that you just described to us, right? So meaning like that person that's supposed to be the king, is the mask, they think they're the king, and below the mask, they're nothing but it? Is it a different perception or perspective of what you should do or how you should show up as a king? Like, what are you seeing when you peel back the onion amongst some of these men that you've helped and really transition and transform their life? Because here's the thing, folks. I see the testimonials. We have the behind the scenes, real depth conversations around impact. It's not bullshit. And the reason why I say that so strongly is because this is a major problem in the United States.
Yeah, it is.
And the work you're doing is changing and causing positive impact, which in turn will cause positive ripple effects.
Absolutely.
So I know that was long-winded, but what are you seeing as far as some of these masks that these men wear?
I'd like to define what I mean by mask first and then answer your question about what I'm seeing. When I talked about like wearing the masks, for me personally, and then I'll kind of expand it more generally, was I had this narrative of in my head, basically my whole life, boyhood and early manhood, of if they only knew the real me, they would reject me. They would judge you. They would shun you. They would, insert negativity after if they only knew the real you, right? So to me, openness and transparency was like scarier than death, right? Well, that void inside of you means that no one actually gets to meet the real you. So you're never actually connecting. I know you're the human connection guy. We had a wonderful discussion about that on our podcast. You're never getting that. You're never getting the genuine connection that men, listen up. You're a human being. You're designed for connection. One of the things you need is not just connection with your wife, not just in the bedroom. You need it emotionally, spiritually, and then you also need it with other men. You need strong masculine friendships that fill your cup and energize you. And if you're wearing all these masks, you've basically put up a wall around you no one can get through. And you're never getting that connection that you need to even restore you back to just baseline levels. So no wonder most men today are salty. They're stressed, angry, lonely, tired, and yearning for more because they're starving emotionally and from a connection standpoint as a human being because they're wearing all these masks. That was me. And so what I mean by wearing a mask is more of it's a defense mechanism that if the people who deserve to know you for real, you're shutting them off, you're starving yourself out, you're choking yourself out. That's what I mean by the masks. There's still discretion, right? I don't just go to every random person I meet and tell them every detail about my life and my bank account, and I lock my doors at night and all these things, right? There's still wisdom and discretion in day-to-day interaction. That's a survival instinct that human beings absolutely must continue. But I'm talking about with relationships that should have some openness, your friends, your business partners, your wife, your kids, like there should be deep connection there. And like we talked about, the man who forges strong connections forges better outcomes for everyone, better business, teams, family, whatever your endeavor is. If you start with the human connection piece and you lead in that endeavor through some strength of vulnerability, you make everyone more connected and the whole team wins, right? So that's kind of a fundamental truth. What I see often is that SALTY acronym, right? Most men are so shut down emotionally. So it's that lover pillar, right? It's that last pillar. It's a lot easier to kind of lean into, I'll just raise as a warrior, right? I'll go hit the gym and now I'm a warrior, right? That's a little bit easier to conceptually unpack than, I need to be honest, or I need to admit to these other men my flaws or tell them that I'm struggling. And for most guys, like I used to be, that's as scary as dying, right? They're so afraid of that because they think all the bad things are going to happen as a result. I find most men stuck there, right? And so they've deceived themselves into thinking that they're stoic, but in reality, they're just cut off. So stoicism is not the absence of emotion, it's control over your emotions, right? You're not reacting to situations, you're responding, right? I'm angry. Well, let me sit with that. Why am I angry? Actually, I'm angry because I misperceived what he said. Let me confirm to make sure. Hey, bro, did you mean that when you said that? Oh, no, dude, sorry. Right? Oh, that's stoicism. I'm responding now instead of just lashing out. Well, you motherfucker, Yep. That would be reactionary. So I find most men
example, by the way, because a lot of people I've had conversations with don't actually understand that. So
Yeah.
a question I was going to ask you, but
Yeah.
you defined it perfectly.
That's probably the number one mask I see men is they've led themselves to believe, they've deceived themselves essentially that, and the world has conditioned them. So it's not, I'm not blaming the men, right? But you have to recognize a problem so you can actually, you have to diagnose it so you can actually prescribe the fix, right? And so that's like step one is, are you even emotionally available? Are you completely cut off? They've deceived themselves thinking that they're these stoic pillars of masculinity. And in reality, they're just turning themselves into a robot. But deep down, you can't identify why you're so salty, but you're just dying to have another guy understand you man to man. That's the most, sorry, go ahead.
Do you think people are only leveraging logic and thinking with their brain and they have trouble falling into their heart and their emotion? Like, do you see that it's, well, the smart thing to do, the logic thing to do is be a warrior and go to the gym and I'm going to solve that problem and I'm going to use my brain and that makes sense, right? Because it does essentially.
Yeah.
But I know with my own stuff, because of my traumas, because of growing up with playing the victim, parents, using drugs, me being like, why am I the only kid that has to move 18 times before 18, right? Victim. Yep. But then I started to use logic and I reduced dropping into my heart. So everything was just based on survival and to get the next thing and just using brain power.
Yeah.
It really took me a long time to fall into that level of love and that level of comfort and drop into my heart.
Yeah, I think it's several factors in terms of, one, men are generally more problem solvers, right? We naturally, and this is where in the context of a marriage, men get themselves into a lot of problems relationally because they're misreading a situation. We naturally want to just fix things, and that's not a bad thing. That's
ding, ding, ding.
But you're designed that way on purpose because someone has to, right? And so we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's like step one. It just comes natural to us. But I think we've also been conditioned a little bit as a society that, well, men don't cry, men don't do this, and they just logic this and logic that. Well, there's many instances where, like with your kids as a great example, logically it doesn't make sense to let my daughter help me with a task because it's going to take me 3 times as long. It's not the most efficient way to do it. But emotionally and long-term investment-wise, it's far more valuable because I'm building connection with her, relationship with her. Doing this thing, she feels like she's contributing to the household now. I'm sacrificing a little bit of time, but it's making this kind of intangible investment in her well-being and in the well-being of my family. And then long-term, if you have that connection when she's a teenager and a boy says something to her or whatever the situation's going to be, she's actually going to come to me and share her problem because I've been consistently putting in that work over time. So that's just one very, rudimentary example, but that's where logic isn't always the answer. So I think it's safe. It feels safe to fall back to our programming. It's what we know. So we fall into that trap. But there's many cases where you need to emotionally work through something a little bit. And I'm not being all like, oh, weepy, crying everywhere you go, that you're still a strong masculine pillar. You're the lighthouse. You're not going to just crash when the storm is raging, right? But you need to connect on that emotional level first within yourself to be stoic, and then to help whoever the person is, and then maybe push to a logical solution after you've kind of unpacked the things, right? And in many cases I've found too, where I'm a little bit of a chess player, I like to think ahead, 7 steps. Well, you may have missed a piece of information, or you misread something that they did or said, or their body movements, and you perceived it as a threat or something like that. And in reality, it's not. And that's where if you just have a little bit of that patience and understanding, you will actually generally get a better solution anyway, from a logical point of view, because you'll actually have all the factors to consider. So I was going to say factors, collaboration. I hope that answered your question there. I think it's just kind of physically, or whatever you want to call it, genetically, it's natural for men to problem solve. And then I think it's a lot of conditioning, and it feels safe. Oh, I can just solve the problem and now it's off my plate. But did you really, right? You're kind of making a short little, it's a short-sighted play for long-term hardship.
Yeah, makes total sense. You brought up women several times and what you were saying, and I'm not going there or not offending.
Yeah.
Do women take offense to a lot of what you say and what your program's about?
Generally, no. But I'm just trying to clarify that really where I see us as a society is to be pro men means you're anti woman. And it's insane, right? To be pro women doesn't mean I'm anti man either, right? There's this false all or nothing mentality that we've adopted as a society. And it's really dangerous. So I try to kind of chip away at that, because you can be fully in support of men being stronger, better family leaders, even if all of your values don't agree with mine. And it doesn't take anything from women. And in fact, like you were saying with the testimonials, all the men come through our program who are married have stronger, better marriages, and their wives are very happy they did the program, because they have a more complete, loving husband who actually understands them and actually cares for them, as opposed to arguing and throwing things, right? So that's really why I'm trying to kind of like highlight the contrast between the two. Now, I don't work with women. I don't fully understand women. I'm a man. I never could. I don't think a woman should teach a man how to be a man, and I don't think a man should teach a woman how to be a woman. Now, I understand the dynamics, especially when it comes to marriage, but I just wanted to kind of highlight those differences to kind of just make it clear. But I'm not sitting here and acting like I'm the authority on what it means to be a woman, because I don't know. I'm a man. So hopefully that cleared it up.
You said that your wife grew with you, gave a lot of grace. What's her experience around all this, and her experience with you now helping men?
So, I mean, early days, it was more of, it's the concept of like a husband should create a covering for his wife, right? And again, a lot of people are going to hear that as like, oh, that means she can't do anything without me. No, that's not what I'm saying. But no wife wants to be left out to hang to dry without the protection of their husband. That's why they married their husband. At their base level, they want some safety and protection. That's a feminine desire. It's not going away. When I started to create that, my wife was able to grow in the things that she was struggling with, because now instead of having to battle me and her problem, she has me helping her with her problem, right? And again, that required me to be empathetic. It required me to slow myself down and be like, well, I understand what's happening here, but she doesn't, because she's filtering through decades of trauma.
Yep.
So I see the fix, but she doesn't. So I need to help her and walk with her. And in the same way, she started to recognize the same about me. Oh, in the same way that I struggle with my childhood stuff, George struggles with his childhood stuff. And so we just started to see each other at that human level, the human connection layer that is so important, not just for business. It's, I'd argue, the number one important level for marriage. That was kind of the first benefit. As we've both grown in this journey, right? Our marriage has improved. Our communication is much more effective now, right? Even difficult subjects, instead of being a fight, they're actually something that unifies us further, even if we don't fully agree, because it's just reaffirming how much we trust each other, right? And a lot of people kind of miss that piece, is that even difficult times can be a positive impact on the marriage, because it's kind of like you're going through fire together, right? So, we've really turned a corner on a lot of these things. And as it relates to what I do now professionally, helping other men, I think my wife is really excited about that. One, because she knows it's something I care about, and she loves to see me doing something I feel well suited to, something I believe I was called to do. And it pays dividends into her life too, right? Not financially, but I'm more complete. I'm living with purpose and accomplishing something I believe I was called to do. So I'm more energetic as a husband, and I'm more involved and patient with her. And, the intangible kind of ripple effects of that absolutely improve her life. And so, every wife married, to the men listening, she married you because you were charming. You were kind of the knight in shining armor at one point in your marriage. You kind of swept her off her feet and you were taking her on the adventure. Well, she still wants that just because you've been married for a period of time. That doesn't go away. She wants to keep going on the adventure with you. And so for me and my wife, this is kind of this new season of life for us. It's this new adventure. And instead of me just focusing on all my problems, I'm actually making an impact outwardly. And that feels exciting for her, because she's joining me for the ride. She's helping me with this. I couldn't do it without her support, without her love. I mean, when I have to travel, she cares for our daughter, our house. I mean, she's just on top of it. And I can't do that without her. So there's this like team mentality that just exists. And honestly, that's below what a marriage really is. Like a true engaged marriage is a covenant. It's a life commitment that's elevated beyond any other relationship you'll have. And we're living it now, finally, right? It took us a long time because we were both a bunch of hurt kids who wounded each other a lot. But I started practicing the 4 pillars, everything we teach in my program. I started living, years ago, and the dividends, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, right? Like the way our life is today is quite literally the first use case of what Elite Sentinel provides.
I love it. I love it. To the man that is listening to this episode, they're not what you just described in your experiences.
Yeah.
They haven't turned the corner and are now living in that covenant. What can you share with that person to almost like audit themselves? Or is there any triggers or any examples that you could kind of share that says, oh, wow, I'm listening to George, I'm listening to this episode today. This is definitely me. I need to reach out. I need to talk to George.
Take this exercise right now, and this will answer that question for you. If you died right now, would anyone show up to your funeral? And if they did, you need to answer honestly to yourself, be absolutely brutal. What do you hope they would say? And what would they actually say? If there's a big gap between those two things, it's time to wake up, man. So pause this video right now, do that exercise. And if you're not happy with the answer you give yourself, you kind of just told yourself what you need to do, right? That means you're not living in the way that you should be. You're not really making that impact that men naturally want to make. That's what legacy is. I'd love if maybe we can define legacy.
Yeah.
I think we get this confused as a society. We think it's having fame and fortune and, having your name etched in buildings and stuff like that. And okay, maybe that's like an element of it, but not really. What real legacy is not something you leave for people. It's something you leave in people. That's a quote by Peter Stropel, but I think that's the best possible definition for legacy. So number one, that starts with your family. Maybe you're not married, but it starts with like your siblings, your cousins. What impact are you making in the number one relationships in your life? You don't have to be married to be making an impact. That's number one. Start with those close relationships. Number two is then it's your career, right? Of course, you need to provide and to be able to amass things and outcomes so that you can do something with it. But your driver isn't to reward self, it's so that you can make outward impact, right? That's number two. And then once you've done those things and you have them in alignment where you're not sacrificing relationships for profession, then you can even take it one step further with your extra time or resources like money to do philanthropic things, to do charitable work, to do those kinds of things. And that's like that longer term impact. Not everyone's going to be able to do that. Not everyone's going to make $1 million and can, donate to their charities and stuff. That doesn't mean you can't make impact. You could go volunteer somewhere, go to a soup kitchen, clean up trash, help the neighbor who needs their thing done that you have a skill set in. That's the type of stuff I'm talking about. That's where real legacy is built on. And if you start doing those things and you revert back to that exercise, your legacy is going to be something that people are proud to speak about. Oh man, that guy took care of people. He made an impact in the lives of others. That's the number one exercise. If you don't like that answer, you definitely need to reach out to me because we'll get you on target real quick. We do it in 12 weeks or less. But that's the most brutal and effective test every man needs to face himself on. Because if that's not in alignment, everything else you're working on is wasted energy. You're a ship without a destination. You're just floating in the ocean wherever the wind blows you. You don't have a destination. You don't have a heading. You're not a man on a mission. And so that's what we help men define for themselves and actually move with purpose and intention to accomplish that. And I'm convinced that maybe I'm not going to be perfect. Maybe I'm not going to do all the things I hoped I could do with this life. But by focusing on that objective, for me, my personal legacy that I'm trying to build, it won't matter where I end up getting because it's always for the right reasons. I've always been investing in the right people and making that impact along the way. That I'm confident that when I leave this earth, people will say, yeah, George cared about others and he made it happen.
Let's go. Where can we find you, George? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so probably the best way is just go to the website. It's theelitesentinel.com. I'm super active on X. It's at Elite Sentinel X. And then for the guys listening, maybe you heard something right now and you're like, dang, I need to see if I can get myself on course pretty quick here. We've developed a free 7-day challenge that's going to walk you through on purpose a specific set of exercises and lessons to kickstart your journey. So if you just did that legacy exercise and you're not exactly happy with your answers, these 7 days are going to immediately help make a massive change in that for you. I can put the link in the description or whatever, for that one. It's free, no obligation. Take it, run with it. That's the absolute best starting point for guys. I developed that on purpose so that guys could instantly get in motion and start getting wins. But those are the best ways to reach me. And, of course, I'm always open. Send me a DM, send me whatever. I just want to see men win.
Thank you, George, for joining the Impact Effect podcast. For everybody listening, we'll drop that information down in the show notes. And we hope you continue to make a positive impact.
Let's go get it
next time.
Yeah, let's get it.